Everybody will start in just a couple of minutes here, letting some people roll in. Okay, it is the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for another Gimmal education session. My name is Marcia Shields, and I'm from our customer success team. Our goal for these sessions is always the same, is to really to try to enhance your expertise with your Gimmal software. We are recording the session, and it will be shared after the event. Dean Meisenheimer is with me today. He's going to be your subject matter expert, and we'll be reviewing our Gimmal Records product. Dean's going to be discussing how Gimmal Records can apply records policy on file share content, just like it can on SharePoint Online, Box, and other content sources. The format will be about 15 to 20 minutes of product review and demonstration, and then we'll follow that up, leaving time for your questions. If you do have any questions, please post those in the Q&A area in the bottom of your Zoom bar, and I'll be sure to share those with Dean after he's done presenting. I think that's it. So Dean, I'm going to hand things over to you.
All right. Thank you, Marcia. All right, let's go to our next slide. So we're going to talk today about managing records on the file shares. And question number one would be, why do I want to do that? Why don't I want to move everything into SharePoint or Box or someplace like that, right? And there's a few reasons why you may either need to leave things on file share temporarily or leave them there permanently, right? And these are a few of those reasons. This certainly isn't an end-all list, but simple one is just change management, right? Users like their file folders. We've all been working with Windows and file-based, folder-based file systems for most of our careers, right? Since we began using computers. So there's a comfort zone there. And depending on how you roll out, SharePoint, it may or may not have a bunch of folder structures. Typically, it's more metadata driven, and that's a change. And users like to be able just to, go to their U drive, their Dean folder, and find their stuff. So that may be one reason, right? Is just to minimize change. The second is cost. When everyone began moving to the cloud and putting things in cloud storage, it was cheap, or at least the perception was that the cloud is cheap, storage is cheap. And what's begun to happen is, like anything, as there's been more usage, as more content has been moved up there, one, cost has gone up, but two, the time and effort to manage that storage is also a cost factor. And so sometimes putting things into cloud storage is not as cost effective as keeping it where it's at on-prem, especially if you can't get everything into the cloud and get rid of your on-prem environment, right? So oftentimes, clients want to use cheaper, very low cost storage for legacy content that may still need to be retained for an extended period. It's not active content. It's really just historical information, but it's still under a 5-year or 7-year retention or whatever. And they don't necessarily want to take the expense to move that to the cloud. They just want to let it live out its life on the file share and then be disposed of properly. And time. If you have a petabyte of content on a file share, even if you've got 500 gigs of content on a file share, there's a time and a cost to migrating that content to the cloud. It's not an over the weekend copy and paste exercise. So that may be another reason why content has to stay in a file share for an extended period of time. And the last one, or the next one, I think is kind of an interesting one. It's dark data, some of it. Do you know everything that's out on your file share? Because if you suddenly move that information into a platform like SharePoint Online, all that information gets anything that is text-based or has been OCR'd, suddenly gets full text indexed and becomes very searchable and easier to find. And so are you going to expose data that has been protected on a file share in SharePoint and make it easily searchable and easy to find by your user base if you don't get it into the right SharePoint permissions in the right sites, things like that? So, if you've got a large volume of content out there, and I always like to use the example, do you know everything that's in your OneDrive? If you were to go through your OneDrive tomorrow and look into all of your folders, are you going to find some surprises, things you forgot you had? Probably. So now extrapolate that across hundreds of gigabytes of data, right? And the last one really plays off of all of the ones above it. It's temporary. Yes, I intend to move everything to the cloud or get rid of rot over time, but I can't do it tomorrow, or I can't even do it this month or this quarter or this year. It's going to take time, but while that information is on the file share, it needs to be under formal records classification and retention, just like my other content does, right? So those are all reasons why you may need to keep managing records on the file share, right? So if you're a Gimmal Records customer, how does the file share connector work? Well, Gimmal originally had just what we called the file share connector for Gimmal Records, and it worked very similarly to our other connectors, where it would do a crawl, look for incremental changes, and apply policy. Over time, as file share volumes increased and more records were being managed on the file share, we found some efficiencies in improving the approach on how that file share connector worked, and we introduced what's called the universal file share connector. And the old file share connector was deprecated a number of years ago. The universal file share connector installs on a Windows server somewhere in your network. And I've abbreviated it UFSC, so we don't confuse ourselves with UFC. It installs on one or more Windows servers in your network. And then it connects to the Gimmal Records web application, whether that's SaaS-based or on-prem, either one, doesn't matter. It's going to connect the same way all of our other connectors do. You're going to set up a service account in Gimmal Records with a login and a password. The connector will log in and then communicate back and forth with the Gimmal Records web app. How many universal file share connectors you have installed will depend on the volume of records, right? So basically, we have some recommendations in our documentation. Part of the analysis that we would do is to help you look at how many records you're going to have. And you may need one, you may need two, you may need more. Scalability, failover also can enter into that. But once the file share connector is configured and talking to Gimmal Records, it then goes out just like our other connectors do and will crawl the managed share locations that you tell us to. So the file share connector server needs to be able to see the network file shares in your network that you want to manage records on. You set up what we call managed shares. So, / server name / share location, and you can have multiple of those. And then the connector goes out and crawls those locations and identifies everything that's out there. And the way this connector works is it will do essentially a full crawl of each managed share every time it runs, and then it runs a reconciliation job with the Gimmal Records database. So it gets a list of everything it found during its crawl, goes to the Gimmal Records database and begins a comparison that says, all right, these match. Oh, I found this record, you don't have it, so it adds that to the records database. Or these records were in the database, I don't find them on the file share anymore, they've been deleted, we'll remove the records, right? So it does a reconciliation step, and with file shares, that's a lot more efficient process than the way we do it with SharePoint, Box, and others. And then, once it has done its reconciliation, it will apply the records policy accordingly, whether that is putting it under retention, declaring the record, adding it to a legal hold, whatever retention lifecycle action the Gimmal Records web application tells it to, the connector will then apply. So with that, we're going to, one other thing real quick. Back to that dark data question. What if you don't know everything that's out on your file share? How are you going to be able to identify things to be able to put policy on, record classifications on that content? Well, one of the other Gimmal products, Gimmal Discover, provides the ability to actually crawl file shares and run classification policies and identify content based on location, based on terms it may find, based on patterns, and it can write classification labels into the file headers. And so when it does that, Gimmal Records, the file share, the universal file share connector, can actually see those labels that Gimmal Discover can apply and use those as one of the tokens in its rules, whether it's classification rules, legal hold rules, triggers. Gimmal Records can leverage that classification label assigned by Gimmal Discover. So I could go out, crawl my file share. I'm not sure everything that's out there. And I can look for things that contain PII data, sensitive data, or I can look for terms that may indicate something's a contract. And I can add a label that says that. So later on, when Gimmal Records goes to do classification on my file share content, it can use those labels to better apply my classification content. So let's take a kind of a look at what this looks like in Gimmal Records. So here's Gimmal Records, our familiar pie charts that we see in Gimmal Records. And you can see here on the left, I'm managing electronic records in 4 different repositories, and one of those happens to be my network file shares. Well, if I go into, if I want to go look at my file share records, I'm just going to go to the Manage screen. And you can see here I've got a mix of different records in different repository. Here's a file share record. If I come over here, here's some more file share records. So they're just showing up out there like any of my other records do. Well, I'm gonna hone in here on a specific record so I can show you a few things. Here are all of my records for Tom Jones. And if we come in here and we take a look at the record overview page for Tom Jones, you can see, even though we look at the URI, this record is out on my network file share in my managed shared folder under Human Resources Benefit Enrollments. That's the folder it's living in on my file share. And you can see Gimmal Records has crawled it. It has a record class assigned to it. It has a unique identifier. It has a retention life cycle. It's even under legal hold. It's being managed the same way any other record, whether that record was in SharePoint, Box, or any other location, it's being managed exactly the same way. Okay? So file share records don't get managed any differently from a records management approach. But let's go look at the properties for this record. Here's where one of the differences comes into play. A network file share is not the most intelligent storage out there. SharePoint, I've got content types, I've got metadata, I've got all of this custom information I can wrap around my document types. In Box, I have metadata templates, right? In Documentum, I can do the same thing. I've got a lot of descriptive information about what those documents are. A file share doesn't have that information. A file share tells me, hey, here's when the document was created. Here's the file name, the file size. Here's the folder that it's located in. Here's the owner, the modified date, and now here's the path, right? And we always break that path down into the URI levels. That's really all I know about a file share record. So how do I do effective classification on file share records? Well, you can get pretty creative by using the path, using folder names, things like that. And you can do a lot of good rules that way. But if your file share is a little less organized, or you do have a lot of dark data out there, this is where Discover can help. If you're a Gimmal Discover user, I've run classification on my file share. It found that in this benefit enrollment document, there was data that's PII, probably like a social security number, right? That would make sense in a benefit document. And so it labeled the document as a PII document. This label that Gimmal Discover applied can be used now in my rules to go, oh, not only is it in an HR folder and benefit enrollments folder, I also know it contains PII. That can help drive my record classification. So if we go over to, and if you recall, this record is in HUM 10, my HR confidential records. Let's go take a look at the file plan. So I'm going to go into my big buckets. I'm going to go into my human resources record classes, and here's HUM 10, my confidential records for HR. Let's take a look at the classification rules. And there's a couple of things you're going to see. First, I actually have a rule that says I don't care where on the file share the record is. If it has an altitude label equal to PII, it needs to go here. Right? That's one way to do it. Another way, if I want to do location-based, is to say, all right, if it's out on the file system, so this rule is specific to the file system, and it's out on the file system in a folder anywhere on the file system named PII data, assign it here. Right? I can do it that way as well. But I can get really creative with my rules. If it's on the file system and the path starts with, /share name /human resources, and it has an altitude label of PII, I could do a rule like that, right? So there are different ways I can use my rules. I can use my properties and my tokens to get very creative in managing my file share record. I could do the same things with my triggers for my retention life cycles. So if we go in here and look at how am I going to trigger my retention, right? What am I going to do to do that? Well, I can come in here and we'll wait for this to load up here. Not sure why that's taking a moment, but maybe I want to create a trigger that is unique to information that's marked as sensitive or unique to my file share records. So I'm going to come in here and here's my file share record trigger. I'm going to click edit. And so here, again, I'm just using location. Hey, this trigger is unique to file system records. If the user moves the folder from benefit enrollments, maybe into a subfolder called archived record, that could actually trigger retention. Maybe I want to use, created date. I don't have custom dates, but maybe I want to use an action by the user on the file share to actually say when the user moves it into a specific folder, archive, archived record, final, whatever you choose to name your folders, that could actually be a retention trigger for a file share record. So again, you can get really creative with how you work with your file share records. And so the last thing I'm going to show real quick is I'm going to log into Gimmal Discover. I know this is a Gimmal Records session, but I want to kind of give you an idea here of what the classification looks like and how, that I showed working with Gimmal Records. So I've logged into Gimmal Discover. I'm in the classification screen, and here you see I have classification labels of all different types. I have set up Gimmal Discover policies and analytic workflows to go out and look and identify documents and assign any of these labels based on the results of the analysis. For PII and PHI data, for personal health information, I'm looking for physician, insurance, benefits, certain medical terms, Social Security, whatever it may be, right? I'm looking for terms that may indicate this is a health record or a medical record. For PII data, I'm looking for tax ID numbers or social security numbers or, whatever it might be, credit cards, right? But I can find and I can label things. And then again, Gimmal Records can use that information to drive its classification for your records. And so this is an example of the results of the classification. And so you can see Gimmal Discover went through and said, all right, well, here's a bunch of documents. This document is on the Windows file path. It's in this location. I found this piece of text with the word contract in it. Well, the file name doesn't say anything about it being a contract, but I now know it's a contract because I found that word in the document, right? Payment terms in a document called Office 365 PDF. I would never know that was a contract, but I know it is based on some of the terms I found in the document. So again, for file systems that are very disorganized or may have a lot of dark data, you can combine the power of Gimmal Discover and its classification capabilities with Gimmal Records to be able to do the record classification based on the results of this labeling. So that's all I have to show from a kind of a demo and a presentation standpoint. Let's move it over and see if there's any questions. Marcia, I saw somebody posted one question in the chat, but I can't see that.
Yeah, I got you there, Dean. We have a few. First one is, are there any limits on the file formats that can be managed as a record?
No, any type of file that can be stored on a file share. Well, Gimmal Records is simply crawling that document and grabbing properties off of the document from the file share, right? So could be a zip file, could be a JPEG, could be, you want to feel really old, a WordPerfect file, whatever it might be, right? I could have said WordStar. Whatever it may be out there on the file share, the file format isn't going to have an impact on Gimmal Records.
Yeah, I do remember those formats too. We do have the second question is, do I have to have a SharePoint connector to use the file share connector?
No, the file share connector has no dependencies on any other connectors. So you could set up Gimmal Records with only the file share connector as your initial deployment, right? Not have any other connectors, or you could mix and match the file share, universal file share connector with the Box connector or the SharePoint Online connector. There's no dependency between any of them.
Okay. And then the last one, which I don't even know the answer to, is Discover included with records, or are they licensed separately?
They're licensed separately, so they are separate products. So if you're kind of curious about what I showed with Gimmal Discover, and you want to learn more about it, if you're a Gimmal Records client and you want to learn more about Discover, reach out to Marcia, and we can certainly get you information on that or do a demo of that for you and talk more about it. So, but it is a separate product in our solution stack.
Yeah, that's it on the questions, Dean. So I think we're going to wrap up here. So thanks everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the session. As mentioned earlier, this is being recorded, so we will send out the recording link to you shortly. Be on the lookout for that. If you, as Dean said, if you like more information on this topic or even have suggestions for future sessions, feel free to send those to me, marcia.shields@gimmal.com. We offer these twice a month over our main products, Gimmal Records, Physical, and Discover. Here's the upcoming schedule. As you'll see, Gimmal Records next session will be August 22nd, and we're going to be talking about managed properties and rule sets. So we hope to see you there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.